This woman finds herself drawn to a student because he reminds her of her first love, who tragically passed away. Her name is Lewis, and she works at a university. One morning, she is preparing to meet Peter, her ex-husband, to discuss their weekend plans. Despite their divorce, they have managed to remain good friends over the years. Lewis wants to make sure their conversation stays light and friendly, reflecting the easygoing relationship they have maintained. As she gathers her things, she notices an envelope lying on her desk. The name written on it strikes a chord in her memory. Scott Finest. Memories flood back as she recalls that 20 years ago, she had a relationship with someone by that exact name. Curiosity takes over, and she carefully opens the envelope. Inside, she discovers that it's an application for a position at her university. However, some of the required documents are missing. Recognizing the potential in the application and feeling a personal connection, she decides to contact the applicant to arrange an interview. Later that afternoon, Lewis visits her mother's home. She climbs up to her childhood room, carrying a sense of nostalgia, and opens a box filled with mementos from her past love. She asks her mother about the Finest family, seeking answers about the Scott she once knew. Her mother explains that the family had moved away and that Scott had passed away, leaving no siblings or close relatives with the same name. Lewis is struck by the coincidence and wonders about the young man she will soon meet. The day of the interview arrives, and Scott is running late. When he finally arrives, he apologizes and expresses his commitment to do his best to gain entry into the university. Lewis begins to review his slides and presentations, only to be interrupted by a knock at the door. It is Peter. Lewis politely explains that this is not the right moment and suggests that they meet later in the evening instead. Once Peter leaves, Lewis turns her attention back to the slides. She is impressed by their quality and asks Scott if he has any questions about his application. He simply shakes his head and begins to leave. Lewis, concerned about proper interview etiquette, quickly catches up to him and invites him to continue the discussion elsewhere. They end up at Lewis's apartment, where she offers Scott a drink. His eyes are drawn to a painting hanging on the wall. Curious, he asks if she painted it herself. She confirms that she did, and he suggests he could paint a portrait of her. Lewis agrees. As they work together, an intimate and personal connection develops. They share a kiss, caught off guard by the sudden closeness. They mutually agree to meet again the next evening to explore this unexpected connection further. Before leaving, Scott calls his mother to report that the interview went exceptionally well. Lewis, observing the interaction, feels amused and secretly pleased that the meeting has gone beyond professional boundaries. Later, Lewis reviews Scott's slides once again before meeting Peter for dinner. During the meal, Peter shares details about his recent travels and admits that he had been accompanied by a woman introduced by Sammy, Lewis's brother. He also confesses that he had sought his brother's help because he had realized he had developed a dependency on intimate relationships. Lewis is shocked, especially as she realizes that Peter had been unfaithful and has not contacted her for over 3 years. She confronts him about the number of people he had affairs with, and he admits to hundreds, including both women and men. Infuriated, Lewis demands that Peter leave the following morning. The next day, Lewis feels melancholic and spends time looking at old photographs, reflecting on her past and the complex web of relationships that have shaped her life. A knock at her door reveals Scott, who has come to check on her. She explains the heavy revelations Peter shared, and Scott tries to comfort her, suggesting they go out for dinner. At the restaurant, they encounter a friend of Scott's, who jokingly warns Lewis not to trust him. Intrigued, Lewis asks why. Scott explains that the friend had covered for him with his mother, claiming he was home when he was actually with another woman prior to meeting Lewis. A flicker of jealousy runs through Lewis, but Scott reassures her of his intentions. Returning to Lewis's apartment, Scott notices that she seems troubled by Peter's recent revelations. He expresses his frustration but does so gently, and their conversation eventually shifts to a lighter and more relaxed atmosphere. The following morning, Scott leaves without much fanfare. Later, Lewis confides in her mother about Peter's betrayal and the emotional toll it has taken on her. Her mother inquires whether Sammy, her brother, will join them for dinner, but she is uncertain. That evening, Sammy arrives. Louis, still feeling agitated, accuses him of covering for Peter. Sammy clarifies that he had no choice. Peter had asked him to keep certain information confidential. He also points out that Louis had been too absorbed in her work to help Peter deal with his personal issues. Upset by the conversation, Louis decides to visit her friend Missy. Earlier, Scott had confided in Louis that he had spoken with Missy when he called the university. Missy reveals that she has recently seen the young man she is dating, which sparks a sense of tension. Scott explains that during their previous conversation, he felt as though he was speaking to the Scott from 20 years ago. He admits that he had invited her to lunch to talk and reconnect. Missy, however, confesses that she had seen Scott only to annoy Louis and insists she has no romantic interest in him. She reminds Louis that both she and Louis were once attracted to Scott, but that Scott ultimately chose Louis over Missy years ago. Missy warns that she will not allow history to repeat itself and that she will not share Scott again. The conversation escalates into an argument, with Missy threatening to reveal everything to Scott. Returning home, Louis finds Scott angry after Missy claims Louis is only interested in him for his resemblance to her late love. Louis tries to explain, but Scott remains upset. The next morning, Scott sees Peter and feels betrayed. Louis clarifies nothing happened, though Scott is disappointed. Furious, Louis calls Missy, who admits she only tried to provoke her. Days later, Louis reconnects with her brother Sam, settles things with Peter, and delivers his acceptance letter. They part with a kiss, agreeing all is well. Subscribe for more movie recaps.